Hello, I'm Alex Mecklenburg, and I am a co-founder of Consequential. We are a change consultancy. We support organizations to make sense of change and to operate well in change. And the wonderful people from Superhighways have asked me to share one of the models that we use quite a lot, and it's called the Edge model. The Edge model is a very practical tool to facilitate team conversations around change and change behaviors. For teams to change, they need to create collective awareness of how they behave and change. And that sounds really simple, but actually it isn't. To talk about change is quite difficult, especially to talk about change behavior. We talk a lot about our feelings around change, but what is more important is to really be clear about how do we behave in change so that we can redesign those behaviors if needed and if helpful. The first step is to create safe spaces. So when teams are about to go through change, they really need safe spaces to share how they feel about change and to reflect how they behave in change. And when teams then listen to each other's stories and um, tell their own stories, they build connections and empathy for each other, but also for themselves. And that is really important because a lot of change stories are full of guilt and shame. I should be much more open to this change. Everybody thinks I'm a Luddite. It's a difficult space. What does it mean to understand change behavior? Well, this tool will help teams to A, notice their own change behaviors because the tool focuses on that, and to be able to use storytelling to explain the change behavior. Once everybody understands how the team and the humans in the team approach change, they can then design the support they need. They can also ask for much more tailored support from leadership and stakeholders. Let me introduce the tool. Before I do that, I give you a little bit of background. The Edge model is part of ORSC, and ORSC is a coaching program which is built on modern systems thinking principles, which means ORSC as the methodology focuses on coaching relationships rather than individuals. So everything happens in relationship with each other. And the model is being developed as well as the program by Marita Fritjon and Faith Fuller. And here it is. Ta-da! It is an edge. The secret is in the word. The way it works and the way you can use it for storytelling is that the left-hand side defines what is the primary, the time before the change. And then the right-hand side is the secondary, what will be. And that edge on the top symbolizes the actual change. I show you how storytelling can really easily happen now. This is a sketch that a team created when I did a bit of work with them. They were 5 team members and they got really confused about change. And I sat down with them, I introduced the Edge model, and I said, tell me about how you operate. How do you move from where you are to where you want to be? The first thing that they acknowledged was that from the left-hand side, you cannot see what is happening on the right-hand side. So you can hear the stories that other people tell about the change. You can talk to people who are already on the other side, but you cannot imagine yourself on the other side. And I think that is one of the core challenges in working in change, that it is really something that is not just unknown, but also unseen. And the team started to reflect on their behaviors. So 2 team members were very clear. They said, we're still at the bottom. We haven't even started the journey towards the change because we are very paralyzed by the idea of leaving things behind. So we're scared that we leave expertise behind and that in the new world, on the other side of the edge, we're just not as important as we used to be. The third member said, you know what? I was really excited about the change and I started to run up. And then something happened that spooked me. And I just ran back again. And that was quite powerful, I think, because I can remember that that happened to me in change situations, being very motivated at the beginning. Then something really difficult happened. And I just went like, no, can't do that. I'm just going back down. The fourth member talked about the fact that he was very comfortable walking up towards the change. But when it came to the last step, he stood there and he started to just watch and observe. He peeked over the edge. And then the last member was, I don't really understand that because my edge behavior is clear. Whenever there's a change, I just jump into it. And not only do I jump into it, I trust that I have something like a rope that then carefully glides me down. So these were all stories about how you approach change. You can use the edge model also to go and how are you landing in change so you get people to tell story on the other side. Here is a beautiful illustration that we had commissioned by an artist to visualize loads of change stories. And what I would like to draw your attention to are the two people on top. This is called dancing on the edge. And I think everybody who's ever operated in change or led a team through change can relate to that. People dance on the edge. They are one day on the new side and then they suddenly dance on the old side again. And it can be really difficult because it can be very demoralizing for leaders who think that they have a super excited team that are crossed the edge and then the next day they're all still on the old system. That's very normal. It's normal behavior. And to know that it is normal behavior, that it hasn't anything to do that you failed as a leader is incredibly helpful. You see those people on the right, kind of drinking a glass of apple juice, gazing into the distance. That's a great change behavior. So yes, you have crossed the edge, but you need some time to land. And then there are other people who just jump down and they know they get caught and they're safe there. Or people parachute down. Lots of storytelling. When and how to use the tool. I want to introduce a couple of scenarios. But before I do that, I just give you an overview where it will really help you. It will help you to assess individual edge crossing behaviors. So people can just talk about, how do I cross an edge? Creeping, sneaking, peeking, leaping, dancing on the edge. It really helps the team to be creative. Depending on how you like to share, you can tell stories, you can draw, you can write, absolutely down to personal preference. It helps you to assess collective group behavior. Remember that little sketch. And then to reflect, so what happens if I have a leaper, a peaker, and somebody who just groundly stays? How do I move as a team? And then last but not least, it helps you to explore what change behaviors might help the team to cross the edge. What do you need? If you run it analog, you need pen and paper and a flip chart. If you work online, a virtual whiteboard, I definitely would suggest that you have dedicated time. Generally think a session should not be longer than 45 minutes. And I would really recommend that you have a facilitator, somebody who holds space, who introduces the model and facilitates the conversation with some probes. And I have given you probes for 3 use cases because I think sometimes it's helpful to get a little ahead in a new model. So the first use case would be how to help individuals and teams understand how they approach change in general. I use that before a big change initiative to just get people to notice that they have change behaviors. The next use case is how to help individuals and teams explore their feelings about a specific change when they are in the change. And I use that a lot when change becomes a bit difficult. Yeah, people are kind of frictioning, really helpful. And then the last one that I'm going to share is how to reflect on change behaviors as part of a retrospective. So something that you could use after the change. There are loads of other use cases, and I'd be really interested to hear your use cases once you started to experiment with the model. Here are conversation starters for use case 1. Use case 1 is to understand overall change behavior. Tell me about how you cross edges or approach change. Maybe you introduce these words, sneaking, creeping, peeking, leaping. Maybe you allow them to use their own words. Be creative, ask them to tell stories and draw. Can you notice patterns in your edge crossing? Are there changes where you behave one way and are there changes where you behave another way? Can you explain the conditions of those changes? How do you cross edges as a team? What happens in the team dynamic? Do different teams in your organization display different edge behaviors? Very important for cross-team change. How might that inform the way that you all work with each other? And then explore what change behaviors would help you and the team to cross the edge. So conversation starters for the first use case. The second use case, to actually understand a specific change. Maybe you're in the middle of it, maybe things have gotten a bit difficult. So tell me, how big or small is that change actually? People often use the analogy of a mountain. So is it more like Mount Kilimanjaro or is it more like the Devon rolling hills? It helps people to visualize it and to think deeply about it. How comfortable are you actually to climb it and to cross it? Just imagine what would be possible on the other side, which isn't possible now. What would you gain? And I deeply believe it's a great tool to have difficult conversations about loss. Because people, I believe, are generally okay with change, but they're really not good with perceived loss, regardless whether that loss is real or not. But if they feel that there is a chance of loss, they get very careful. This model has a very kind way of talking about it. So the question I generally ask is, what are you concerned about leaving behind as you cross the edge? And people tell me their stories. They're concerned that they leave behind expertise, knowledge, relationships, self confidence. And then there's a last question: what do you need to cross this edge and to embrace the other side? The third use case, if you use the model as part of a retrospective. Here's a probe. What did the primary look like? So, what was true before the change? And what does the secondary look like? What was true after the change? What defined your edge behavior? What defined your change behavior? What allowed you to move over that edge? And is there a collective team or even organizational change behavior that would be helpful to develop and to define before starting the next change program? That's a really, really big question. And I have seen teams develop principle work on the back of it. And they developed a set of change principles that they then helped the team to adopt through training, through reflections. Here's an example of storytelling for how leadership shifted their behavior in change. So both teams were stuck. The first team told then, when we introduced that model, a great story. They said, you know what, we feel as if our leaders are pulling us up, these big ropes, they're not very comfortable. Everybody is deeply exhausted. And the rope sometimes rips and we're all back down. Really not a good situation. And once they talked about that, and I asked them, so what would you need to embrace the change? They went, actually, instead of a rope that pulls us up, we would like feed stations, like in a marathon. So plan the change through and give us opportunities to regain our strength, to talk with each other, to have a breather before we do the next step. And that was so visual that the team was able to actually develop that in the program. They also said very clearly, we don't need leaders to pull us up. All we need is to give us direction. So see that leader on top with a little flag. And we also would like people to cheer us up and to motivate us. It was a massive shift. The second team, different scenario. What happened was that people were dancing on the edge. So one day they were really excited, and the next day they were still, nah, I'm not quite sure. What happened was that the leaders got really, really impatient and they started to shout at them. You see that little person with, that big kind of amplifier. And that they said was horrible. I felt very guilty. So that feeling of guilt and shame for dancing on the edge. And the leaders were in the storytelling sessions, and what the team then contracted together with the leaders was actually, leaders, could you join us in the dance on the edge? Don't get nervous, trust us, listen to us. We still need to work this through, but we want to do that with you. I thought these were two great examples. Why is the tool helpful? Well, hopefully a little bit was just being demonstrated with this very visual example, but I give you a couple of bullet points. The model helps you to normalize the conversation about change. It really stops fear, guilt, shame enter the conversations. It can actually be joyful to share those stories, and it creates shared language. You talk about edges or mountains. You make that visual, when you start to talk about change. It helps you to assess where a team is or yourself, where you are on the change journey. And if you do it on a regular basis, you get a lot of knowledge out of that. It helps you to emphasize the value of all change qualities. None of the change qualities that I've just talked about are generally bad or good. Actually, it's really helpful in a team to have leapers who just jump into it, but also peakers. and to have people who are maybe a bit more careful about change. As a team, all of these behaviors are incredibly helpful. And it helps you to create understanding and empathy for other change behaviors, or even realizing that different people have different change behaviors, because sometimes we're so obsessed with our own behavior that we assume everybody does it exactly the same way. So when teams understand their patterns and change, they're empowered to embrace it with clarity, with confidence, and with unity. Now, as with any tool, I would really, really encourage you to experiment. Feel free. You cannot break this tool. Adjust, get new probes, evolve how you use it. And I would love to hear your version of how you use it. And please, first of all, I thank you for watching. And I ask you, if you really use it, share your experiences with me. I'd be delighted to hear the stories. If you have any other feedback, please drop a note to Superhighways. They're also always very, very happy to hear from people. Now, I hope the tool sounds helpful. Just start to use it. That's a change in itself. What do you need to cross the edge to use that tool? If you need something from me, as I say, drop me a note. Have a wonderful day, and thank you so very much for listening. It was a pleasure sharing this tool with you.